Thank you so much. So this morning, the real disaster happened. I had been working on the slides for a long time, and an hour ago I threw them away. So I had to had to do them again. But so the styling is not as perfect. But and I used from other slides. But yeah, so sorry for that. But I was happy that I finished creating them again. So that for starters. So it's I think I really love to hear your cases and your difficulties with data, and because we're going to cover a lot of it this afternoon with you, and tomorrow a short wrap up. So it's a bit static because I'm sitting here and you're sitting over there, and you're at your offices or at home. But if you have questions, please interrupt, because that is the only way I think we can have meaningful dialogue. So this is what we have. This is what I have planned in terms of topics. It's a bit much. We'll start slowly, and I think as soon as the questions come, we will deviate from this path, and you will have the slides. I just now shared the link with Claudia. So there's the slides, and there's some additional material that I will refer to, and that will become available to you. Shall we go? So so sensitive data, personal data, health data, all that kind of stuff. So basically, this is it's always good to know what we are talking about, and there's a lot of difficulties with the definition. You know, if there's no personal data, then you don't have to be concerned about the GDPR. But there's all kinds of personal data. There's personal data, special categories of personal data. There's other kinds of sensitive data, and this is why we just wanted to touch upon these topics. So sensitive data is a special category of personal data that requires additional protection. And to be honest, the purpose of the GDPR is to have a stronger internal market and to have a free flow of data, and to be able to collaborate in public-private collaborations, but not have for every country in the EU a different set of rules. So one set of rules for all the countries within the EU, and to be able to share the data and to collaborate and with that data. So this is already clear in the title of the GDPR, where you need a free flow of data, but you also need data protection, because, of course, certain types of data need protection. And it's not so today we're focusing, I think, a bit on the privacy stuff, but there's also the business, the intellectual property stuff, right? That we can, if you have questions about that, we can also address that. But we're mainly focused on certain types of sensitive data, but commercial sensitive data is also a category that you could easily apply the same mitigating measures, so the same types of risk assessment and mitigation measures for. So why is sensitive data important? I think most research is done based on sensitive data. I think in most cases people use personal data, but this is the real interesting stuff, the sensitive data, because it really tells you something about your audience or about your data subjects or the individuals. And that is not a problem as far as the GDPR is concerned. So people usually try to they get a bit anxious. So now I'm processing personal data and I'm processing sensitive data. But that is okay, and there's many places in the GDPR where it states that research in itself is something that we want as a society for many reasons, and there's also exceptions, especially for statistics and academic and research purposes, that allow you to do a bit more, because we have some things in place that we will discuss, stuff like ethics committees, data management procedures, and so on. Because we have certain things in place, then that is why we are allowed to do a bit more with data and sensitive data than perhaps for marketing purposes or other purposes. And one great example is that I will not bother you with all the articles, but one of the articles states that if you do further processing of personal data that was collected for a certain purpose, not for research, then it is considered to be not conflicting the purpose of research. Is considered to be not conflicting with the previous purpose that it was collected for. So that is already a big opening for academic research. So that is just personal data, but now we are looking at sensitive data. The other reason why we want to protect sensitive data, so we are trusted with this data in academia, but the reason why we of course want to protect this data, and we need to protect this sensitive data more than personal data, is because if people have access to this kind of information, you can really do harm to people. And there's many historic examples. There's still ethnic cleansing going of still actual in the world. People are discriminated for many reasons and excluded from access, or even worse, go to jail because of these aspects. So this is why you cannot really, if people trust you with their sensitive data, then you should really consider that a serious contract in which you protect that data as far as you have promised. So I've talked with researchers that, for instance, went to, say, Southern American countries to interview people that committed a coup. And this is interesting to understand how these political movements work and so on. And I talked to, I helped researchers that went underground in Russia, in certain criminal environments to understand the workings of, well, and that is all good. That is far from desk research, but also say has some dangers for the researchers themselves, but also for the data subjects. If people are at the border and the people at the border want to have access to your computer and get all the data of these confidential interviews with these with the people that committed these coups, then for sure they are in more danger than they were before. So that is the basic reason. And sensitive data also includes information about your, so it says here genetic data and biometric data. So this is where the interesting stuff happens, but it also comes with an extra responsibility. And then we have just the regular personal data that is, so personal data is data that is directly or indirectly related to living individuals. As soon as you are dead, you have no privacy rights anymore, as far as the GDPR is concerned. But usually in the data sets that you are in, there's also family members and so on. So you still have to consider their privacy rights, but privacy is only a right that you have as a living person in the EU. So this is typically stuff like name, number, identification number, and so on. One example, so there's a lot of, so sometimes we have personal data, and these are serious debates. A license plate, is that personal data? Just a pop question for you. Who says personal data is license plate is personal data? Depends on. It's always a good answer to start with. That depends. Sorry. How many columns are there in your data? Only a row with license plate? Yeah, just say you see a car on the street and you see the license plate. Is that personal data? You would think no, but the answer is that it is personal data, because there is a database indirectly, not most people think it's not accessible to you, right? So this is some database that no one has access to. But because of the way we have open data sources and we have a lot of personal data on Facebook and all that stuff, sorry for it was a bit of a trick question, but it is becoming hard to say data is anonymous. But in this case, there's a database where this license plate information is say connected to you if you own that car. So you can and that refers to you as the owner of the car. But in one of these sessions, someone told me that in her neighborhood, a child was abducted in broad daylight, and this really happened in the Netherlands, in a certain city, and the child was taken into a car, and people noticed this on the street and noticed the license plate. They had a WhatsApp group for the community, and then they put in the information about the car and the license plate. And one of the people that lived in that neighborhood was a garage owner, and he was able um, to make the link with to verify and to make the link with the person that was driving. And the police was called, and the child was recovered within a very short amount of time. But also, if I drive to my university, there's this garage, and they want to register what my license plate is. So your license plate is registered in many so it's supposed to be easy, right? If you come somewhere and you pay for it, then you don't have to put in your paper the proof of your payment in the machine, but it opens because it recognizes your license plate. So many cases, even if you don't are aware really that in this case license plate is personal data, it turns out to be personal data. And of course, yes.
I was just going to give another example.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, so the question
Oh.
never mind, because as a resident, most people cannot understand the question. So if you understand the question.
On news reports, if you have politicians and things
Yeah.
getting into a car, they'll frequently blur out the license plates.
Yeah.
Because
For this reason, yeah.
yeah.
COVID was a real I don't know if you looked at the COVID news with a privacy mind, but in North Korea, people just put on on every citizen, they just published where they were at which time and who they were with. So there if you Google it, you can find newspaper items about this. And people found out that the husbands or the women had relationships because of this disclosure of information. But also, there's in many cities there's cameras that just record every movement, and there's a group of people that and you can access this data sometimes via open. I've put in the information on the online course. I've put some of this information on. You can really track people, and you can track these movements. So probably this is the baker doing a round, or this is probably some celebrity going to this spot. So people, based on the license plate, you can assumedly learn a lot about people. And sometimes people put they forget to blur the license plate, so you get that from their social media outputs and so on. And so it's not everything is personal data, but some types of personal data you should really protect and not put on online and so on, because yeah. So this refers to directly identifiable or indirectly identifiable. So in this case, and as we will see in most cases, the quasi-identifiers, so the indirectly identifiable data, are the most interesting usually for research purposes. And so not so much names and specific ages. And this is also why we can pseudonymize these data sets and just give a meaningless string instead of the name, and instead of the specific age, come up with a say a 5-year span of age in which we can identify people there. Unless you, of course, are specifically interested in this specific age related to other um, identifiers. So we don't need to go. We can stop here talking about the definitions, but usually this is the most difficult part, because it is also indirectly revealing something about you, and some people go crazy with this definition, and but the GDPR is not relevant for all data, but yeah, well, I wanted to point at this distinction. In terms of risk, so the GDPR is risk-based. So if you say if you see here identifiable, the second one, and not identified yet, but possible without unreasonable effort. There's a lot of statements in the GDPR that say stuff like reasonable, and it refers to so with considering the state of technology and so on, all these refinements in their statements, they refer to a world that you don't have to, in terms of your risk assessment, you don't have to look into the future and come up with scenarios where quantum computing will actually be here, and you will be able to brute force all your passwords and so on. That is not what is expected of you. So I just wanted to clarify this. So there's a lot of hype around the GDPR, but it is risk based. You can accept risks, but you should know your risk and mitigate the risk. That is basically the story. And if people tell you otherwise, please refer them to me, because people keep each other in a sort of deadlock, because they think, and we will see this in a bit in a few slides, because I think the reason why the GDPR is not successful is that because we as a society were not able to come up with our own risk assessments. Because we're not sure, we think, okay, the risk could be high, so just to be sure, we put all the risks high. So the mitigation measures should also be high, because no one wants to be that guy or that woman that says, well, the risk is medium. And sometimes, in most cases, risk is medium because of the measures you've taken, and you don't have to go through all the hoops every time again. But there's and so sometimes within an organization you're able to assess a risk like this and say, okay, this is a low risk or medium risk, because it is encrypted, because we have applied the principles like data minimization and so on. It's not anonymous data, but doesn't have to be anonymous, because your data is worthless if it's anonymous. But since we've taken some measures, the risk is acceptable, it's medium or low, and thus we can confidently process the data for research purposes. But because, and especially if we work in international groups with people in different countries, different organizations, then you see that the risk appetite and the risk assessment, even the risk identification, becomes a problem. And that is, I think, the real reason why nothing is possible anymore. And that was not the intention of the GDPR, because the free flow of data, as you remember, was one of the purposes, the basic purposes. So we'll get to that, and I hope we can be the ones that can be a bit more relaxed about the risk-based approach of the GDPR. So there's also health data. There's also data concerning health. I'm just going a bit faster now. These are examples of health data. Again, from other sources, don't forget that information retrieved from your Fitbits or other other types of sensors is also health data. And yeah, think about who you share the data with in general. There's medical data, which is a subset of health data. Just to clarify the concepts a bit. These are from Dutch authoritative bodies, but in most countries you will have similar approaches. If you like, I can look into specifics for your country. Please tell me if you like that, and I will do that as I try to look in it at it this evening, so I can feedback to you tomorrow. But in most cases, you will see this similar approach. The reason why we have the reason why there's still difference between countries is also because there's not only the GDPR that is directly valid for our data processings, but there's also national implementation legislation, and this sometimes leads to different different regimes. So, for instance, in the Netherlands, we cannot. There's something called a personal identification number. I think it's if you so I'm referring to text also in the PDF that you have access to in the folder, in the shared folder. So this is one of the examples I mentioned there also. So there's something like a personal identification number in the Netherlands. It's called BSN. In other countries you have a similar thing, and but it's called differently. And in the Nordics, specifically in Sweden, you are allowed to use to process this given certain conditions. But in the Netherlands, you are not unless you have a legal obligation to do so. And it should be stated in law that you have this right or this responsibility and this right to do so. So there are some differences that sometimes for research purposes make it difficult. And this, I think medical research is usually also done with people from Sweden because they are able to really use this personal identification number, and this is very important if you want to look at certain traits in family relations, and you can relate the family members based on these numbers. In the Netherlands, there's something called, in every country has this, the National Statistics, CBS, and they are allowed to do this for you, and that is the neat way of the proper way around it. So you can provide them your data. They have all the macro data on the citizens in the Netherlands, and you can discuss with them for which research purpose you need access to which data, and they can combine the data for you at a high quality rate, because they are allowed to do the matching based on the BSNs in the Netherlands, for instance. You will not be able to get it out, but they will prepare the data sets, and they combine the data sets and give you access to it in a sort of vault. But you cannot get it out yourself. But they will give you this information. They will export it for you, and they will do some re-identification risks assessments to be sure that you will not have in your tables and so on, you will not have personal data. So so this is what we're talking about. Data is collected and available in many places, but this is what we're talking about: personal data, special categories of personal data, sometimes also called sensitive data, health data, and so that was part one, the definition part. I'm going to assume, I'm just going to take a short break, but after every section. But are there some questions left to the? No? Okay. So data minimization and pseudonymization. There's this Article 5 in the GDPR. I'm going to do it anyway. So I try not to mention the articles, but it's a habit. Sorry. So there's one of in the GDPR it states these are the principles that you should adhere, and we're going to look at them. And one of them is data minimization, and this is an easy one. And I mentioned this specifically because people sometimes get, so the interpretation of what data minimization is sometimes also difficult. If you do a long-term study for the next 40 or unending, without an end, if you do a long-term study on a big population and you need a lot of health data from them. Like for instance, Generation R, Generation Next in Rotterdam, the Rotterdam study. What is data minimization? That depends on the question. So what is the purpose of your research? If you want to collect certain characteristics of health and in related to families and so on, then if your research question allows for data, then that is your data minimization. The thing, so data minimization can be thousands of data points, but the thing is, what is your research? What is the research purpose? So for me, I'm the data protection officer at the Erasmus University. So for me, it starts with purpose. If someone comes to me and says, "Oh, I have a cool idea. I want to do this, and I have an app, and I have all these things," and okay, that's cool. What is your research question? What is the purpose? And sometimes people, so I give you two black and white scenarios. So some people say, well, I'm very interested in broadly in all kinds of stuff related to health and behavior. And that's not a good research purpose. It's sort of a carte blanche, and this is not how we do research, right? It's yeah. So and you can also say, well, I'm very interested in this specific topic, but since I'm interviewing these people, I might as well ask them also other questions that are not relevant for my research question. That is not data minimization. So it's very much related to the purpose, and your purpose can be a bit broader. The GDPR also says you cannot have blanks, so carte blanches. You cannot have I forgot the other word, but it needs to be specific. But it does not need to be really specific, because sometimes if you want to collect data and you want to reuse that again for further on research, or for instance, you want to make it available following the FAIR principles, and you have a really very specific purpose defined, then your research participants might think, well, I've agreed with this very specific research purpose, and now other people from other universities or other organizations are also using the data, but that is not in line with my very specific purpose that was agreed with me. So it does not, so there is a balance, right? It does not need to be very specific. You could make your own data unfit for follow-on research for that purpose. That is a thing to think about in your research design. We'll get to that also, but this is how the system works, right? So these principles, if you understand what these principles are there, you can really use them to create your own, for instance, your consent forms and so on, because you can already tackle some of the issues that you have later on. Because you do not want to go back to the data subjects to ask them, of course, consent for a different purpose or a bit broader purpose or so on. So that's why it's good to talk about these things in the design phase. So we're talking about data minimization and pseudonymization. Just to clarify, these are the Article 5 principles. So in the blue center, there's this Charter of Fundamental Rights, and there's so there are very generic statements. And in the first green circle around it, you see the Article 5 principles. So lawfulness, fairness, transparency, and you also see data minimization on the right. These are the principles. There's some guidance on these principles, and there's stuff where you can look it up. But this is I think the relation between these generic rights, fundamental rights, and how these rights are translated to principles. And what the GDPR mentions in this Article 5 is you do not only have these Article 5 principles, but you also have the accountability principle. You should not only do the things following, for instance, storage limitation, but you also need to be accountable. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you did this and what your risk assessment was. And the accountability part is where the administration starts. Now, there's two ways to look at this. So in general, So so this is the heart, I think, of every data protection impact assessment or every risk assessment that you take. How much did you do justice to these principles? And if you have a clear story for this, for instance, so this is a way to I've just given some examples of what you can do. For instance, you can for lawfulness you can document your legal ground, and you can have a DPIA risk assessment. But there's whole books written about what you can do. But this is the basic, again, a basic the core of data protection, right? And it's not only security. So most people think about it needs to be safe and no one should have access to it. So the integrity and the confidentiality aspects. You also have so that are the more security related stuff. But there's also stuff like purpose limitation and fairness and transparency and data minimization. These are specific privacy aspects, and they're a bit different because they're not so binary. In terms of integrity, you can say, okay, what is your role? Do you need to have access? Yes or no? And typically where there's privacy aspects, the answer starts usually with that depends, and it depends on the context. Because what is the purpose? Purpose limitation depends on the purpose, right? So what is the purpose? How is it defined? Is it broadly defined? And then okay, you're good to go with many data points and so on. So, and that is, by the way, also I noticed a difficulty if you talk with if privacy people talk with security people and even with legal people. The security people, they are very binary minded, I think. Just you could also, I think most security people would and I'm not bashing security people, but most security people, they just love to do so just give me the formula, I can automate it, and everything will be okay. But you cannot automate context, right? That is one of the difficulties. So perhaps people, I know people try to do this, but context is difficult. And for me, so my background is in philosophy. For me, this is Aristotle, right? So Ethica Nicomacheia. So he says, when are you a good ruler? And there's a medium between doing too much and too little. You can be lazy, you can do too much, but how do you decide what is the mean? What is the best way? Depends on the context. If you are in a battle, you can also overdo, or you can do too little, and so on. And it has relations with experience and knowledge and these things. But the thing is, it's not so binary. You cannot come up with a rule that goes in all situations. So that is sometimes a difficulty. And sometimes people, I see this. People come to me and say on a Friday, I have a real great idea for a research project. Just tell me it's okay. And because I have all these partners, and I think it's real good, and society needs to know these things. And then I have to say, okay, what is it about? And usually there's different stuff and different work packages and so on, and you need to really assess this. And it's not something you do in an hour, because they have thought about this typically for 6 months or so, or longer. And I cannot possibly grasp this in an hour, and that's usually what people think. Just, it looks okay, I've done this before, just say it's okay. So, but yeah, that's not, and for some people that have done this multiple times, of course, then I believe this, and then they've come up with other things. But yeah, this is the problem. When you're at the back of the procedure, then there's no room to really think with the people. So if you are support staff, you will know that it's difficult to be at the table at where the ideas start of the researchers. And if you're a researcher, please think of supporting staff as people that try to help you. I hope they do, and get them on board as soon as possible, because then there's still room. It's for me, the solution is always we can do it. It's just the how that is different. But for sure, if we have time, we can come up with a way to properly deal with it. Yes.
We have a question in the chat.
Cool.
John is asking, how do they determine what an independent authority is? to regarding the slide of in the blue circle. Compliance with these rules shall be subject to control by an independent authority.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so for the translation for privacy stuff is the supervisory authority, national supervisory authority. So in the Netherlands, this is called the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens. In England, the UK, it's called ICO. In France, it's the CNIL, the CNIL. So these are the national supervisory authorities. They have a legal position in the GDPR. It's in the later chapters, and there's a lot about this. Okay, so that is the factual answer, but you will also see that there's different interpretations. Some data protection authorities or national supervisory authorities, those are two different names for the same thing, are a bit different. You will see, for instance, which country has the most critical national supervisory authority? Well, what is your gut feeling? If I would say Italy or Germany. I see people smiling, so I think we know, right? It's Germany, and there's a good reason. There's all kinds of historic reasons, and there's of course in alle Länder there are there's not one in Germany, but there's many, and and it's very interesting, and but I think. So if I for my work, of course, I have to read a lot of interpretations, but usually I like the German and the English versions of the interpretation. So the problem with the English is that they left the EU and they came up with their own version of the GDPR, and they're still, I think they're going away a bit more from the GDPR towards America, which in the end will be problematic for their adequacy decision. Probably you can forget that, but they're considered to be a third country because they left the EU, but they're considered to have this basically the same level of data protection as in the EU. And if you do that, it needs to be checked by the European Commission. Then you get this stamp that you have the adequacy decision, which America had until, of course, Schrems went to court a few times, and then the European Commission got overruled by the court, the European Court, and in the end, the court is the real the real supervisor, the real authority. That there's a long way of giving the real answer, but because the national supervisory authorities tend to be more strict than really need be. And there's a lot of, you can find a lot of articles about this. The point is that they tend to be too strict, and also, for instance, they try to get rid of for historical reasons, but we don't get into that. They like to get rid of the risk-based approach in the GDPR, which is a very hefty debate, because if that is the case, then what? Yeah, well, that is not a future. I think it's workable, but yeah. So that is the way it works. If you can also, if so the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens, they sometimes have statements about how to interpret a certain principle. There's one case in which they had to actually, there's more than one case in which they had to redefine their interpretation because of legal problems in the interpretation, and that's why we go to court to get, if there's open principles in the GDPR and how do we interpret it in a specific situation, then and you get a statement by the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens, but if you don't agree, you can go to court, and what the court says matters, and then you can take that whole route. But okay, so that is a long answer, perhaps too long, but that is the way it works.
Added a list in the digital parking spot of this authority. So if you don't know for your country, which one it is, you can at the digital parking spot look it up and should find things on there.
Cool.
For the EU countries, that's at least what I found.
Cool. Yeah, and I must say I really love the CNIL and the ICO because they give some guidance. You cannot be the police guy if you don't, or a woman if you don't ever come up with guidance, I think. And in the Netherlands we don't have that much guidance actually, so it stays a bit vague. So these are the principles. This is the way to. So now you've seen all the principles a bit and seen some examples. There's some security stuff. There's some privacy stuff. Different worlds come together, and we have to be able to demonstrate that we do it like this. And this is why we come up with DPIAs, and this is why we come up with consent forms, because we have to prove that someone has given consent. I'm going to speed up a bit because so again, a different view on what the GDPR actually. So because we've looked at these principles, but these principles basically say, okay, what is the purpose? Like I mentioned, this is from Bart Scherp. He's now professor, but this was from 2019 when he was not yet. So what is the purpose? Why are we collecting data? Then is it lawful? There you see the articles 5 and 6. And then how do we process personal data? So, and how carefully you typically do a DP, a risk assessment. Then you see what your risks are. Then you define your risk mitigating measures. And this is your cookbook for your research project. That's all. Yes?
We have a bit of an echo for the remote participants. Claudia, can you check if all the mics are, or maybe Marlon, if your computer is muted.
Do you have your sound off?
I have it on.
Maybe you switch your sound off and then. So. But the sound, that has to be off, exactly.
Oh, that was off.
So that was off. But is it really bad?
So now we have, the echo is gone already.
Okay.
Hopefully it stays that way. Thanks for the feedback, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. So if it, yeah. So we were talking about, sorry, in this session, we were talking about data minimization and pseudonymization. We talked a lot about data minimization, one of the principles, and but data pseudonymization is also specifically mentioned in the GDPR. What is data? What is pseudonymization? There's two things, right? There's pseudonymization and anonymization. Anonymization is changing your data in a way that it cannot ever refer back to a living person. And because of this disconnection between the data and a living person, it's not considered personal data anymore. So that's why people like to say, oh, data, I have no names in my data set, so it's anonymous, so I don't have to follow the GDPR. That's what sometimes people will say. But the test, what is really anonymous, is a difficult test, and this is also where the national supervisor authorities are a bit in agreement about how difficult that really is, because of all the open data sets that you have, and you can link data sets, and then you can really get a lot more information than you would expect from data sets, and you can reveal. You can have group identification or even person level identification. There's many examples of this, but pseudonymization is considering your data set, checking what data points you don't really need, and changing them. For instance, hashing them, or and there's many techniques for pseudonymization, but you can hash them. You can instead of a specific age. You can have age groups of say 5 or 10 years. You can randomize. You can do all kinds of stuff with the data points that you don't use, and all these actions make it difficult to point to see in the data set to link with a living person. So you start with name and number become a string, and so on. But the data points that you need, of course, you don't touch, because otherwise your data becomes well, not trustworthy, and your conclusions become difficult also. So don't overdo it, and that's another thing. So pseudonymization is actions on your data to to make the risk of re-identification lower, but it's still considered personal data. But it's a good practice to do so, because if you really need the personal data, you also take responsibility for the data. But if you don't need it, you can just pseudonymize it, those data points that you really don't need. And I found in the LCRDM there's a national working group from also by SURF. They came up with so I love this 5 safes. It's also in your folder. This 5 safe approach by Privacy Analytics, and the LCRDM group also adhered or they implemented this 5 safes approach. And this is how you see the identification level from left to to right. Fully right is anonymized, and then left is as well, not pseudonymized, is very, yeah, so as personal data as it gets. And in every stage you can say there's a levels of pseudonymization. You can have weak pseudonymization and strong pseudonymization. And in the framework, the 5 safe frameworks, you consider, okay, what is the relation with the people I work with? I have a public-private collaboration. Can I trust them, or do we have a long working relationship? Then perhaps we can have a lower pseudonymization risk. But if you have to work with them, and if so, for instance, the insurance company, then you want to perhaps have a high level of pseudonymization. But for academics, only academics, you can have perhaps a lower level of pseudonymization. These are the parameters you can work with. So it's not also this is not a binary thing. It's a scale, and based on you would probably, and there's a lot more to be told about this, of course, but based on the nature of the data, the scale of the data, and the nature of your collaboration, you can define, okay, we think it's appropriate to have this level of pseudonymization. I just want to, this thing is also in your, as a PDF, you can also look it up, but I just wanted to point at it with you. The risk of re-identification becomes lower if you are anonymous, of course, but of course in research groups, if you work together on work package 1, you need to have access to that data, and you can have a low level of pseudonymization. Then here you can, here is what the 5 safes are for. You can say, okay, what needs to be safe? What are the 5 safes? Projects, people, data, settings, and output. And so you can have and this is why I like it, because it's not just about the data, it's also about the people that you work with. It's also about the output. Also need. So I think this is a very it's a very compact and concise paper, but it helps you in a strategic way to assess your risks more than just the data. And yeah, be sure that some risk can also be mitigated by agreements, right? If you legally agree that you do certain things, that you use certain technologies to mitigate risks, that will be okay. So this is the 5 safes, and this just going to skip through them. This is the safe projects. so you look at the project dimension, and you look at the people. I think if you have, for instance, it's a bit of a sort of easy statement, but if you have untrained people, then the risks may become higher. I see this. I hope I don't offend anyone, but if you are trained in social sciences or medical sciences, then probably you are aware of sensitivity of data and so on. But sometimes people that work in economic tricks, how to say economics, but econometry, then if you are used to working with big data sets and crunch them, and one of or two or 10 of the tables are personal data, then you could say you're not so experienced with the fact that those columns are you don't realize that there's people behind those numbers, perhaps if you work in certain fields, and that has that I think that's related to the sector that you work in, and this kind of discipline that you work in, and so on. But because we are collaborating more and more, not only across disciplines but also across borders, sometimes bigger data breaches or the risks are related to the uncertainty, because some people, they manage data or they process data that they're not that they don't have a notion of what personal data is. That's not you, but that's what I see sometimes. The data we talked a lot about, the settings. Do we have by default the right settings? We can of course go crazy in the settings and make it unworkable. That's also not the way, because people will find ways around it. So it needs to be also user friendly. It's easier said than done. And you can, well, this is just for inspiration. You can look at the PDF that I will share with you, and the outputs. I think this is what you already know when you publish stuff. It needs to be. This is where where you make it public on a website or in an article or in your education courses, your conferences and so on. And that needs to be okay as well. So also for your consent forms, if you ask consent for processing of data, make sure that you also have an option. Can I also use this for conferences? Not so sometimes imaging is or interviews are really important. If you see interaction between stuff, and that's personal data, you just make sure that you also ask not only for follow-on research but also for education purposes consent, and explain why it is important and how you do it. Short break. So that was data minimization and pseudonymization. Risk assessment. So this is the again the GDPR is risk-based, and what does a risk really mean? So this is where it states how you should do it. You should ask yourself, will this processing this research project likely result in high risk? So what is likely and what is high risk? This is a list of what is defined as high risk. So evaluation or scoring, automated decision making, systematic monitoring, the stuff we don't want, right? So without people in the loop. Sensitive data or highly personal of a highly personal nature. So this is one of the risk categories. The idea is you get a list of 9 risk identifiers, and if you have 2 or more, then you should do your DPM. You probably end up with a high risk because, for instance, the scale is very high and you automate it. So you have millions of people and you do automated decision making on them with legal or similar significant effects on them. That is considered to be a high risk. So that is in terms of definition, 2 or more, then you must do it. You are always free to do it. And I think. So I'm a privacy guy, so I like doing privacy stuff. But it's really there's a learning curve. If you do DPS, then you get the trick, right? It's not it's not just ticking the box, but if you understand, okay, so where are the real risks? Usually what happens is if I talk with someone, with a researcher, and say, yeah, well, I want to do interviews. Okay, so how do you do the interviews? So the assumption would be I have a sound recording. Yeah, I have a sound recording, but no, but also a video recording because it's important what the facial expressions are. Okay, so how are you going to record it then? Yeah, on my iPhone because it's this is what I always have, and then it goes to the iCloud. Okay, that's not really privacy friendly per se, but so people now that do observational research have these cameras that are not connected to the web, and then what happened is the person fell asleep in the train, and the camera was stolen. So people were not interested in the tape, but in the camera. So if you do public transport with sensitive data, keep it separate. And some people now really don't use so public transport anymore because they think, well, there's a lot of things I don't have in control then. So people had just had a whole day with interactions between I can say what, but they observed this and made video recordings of it, and the tape got lost. You have two problems. You need to collect your data again, and you have to explain what happened. And that's so. This is what happens during a DPIA, right? Where you see, oh shit, this can happen and that can happen and so on. And that's not usually it's not theoretical stuff. It's things that happen. People make mistakes. I deleted my my slides this morning, and people make mistakes. Yeah, what is your backup plan? So and the thing is for the DPIA last general remark on the DPIA, usually you do want to have a security person, a privacy person, and a researcher in the same room, and that becomes an interesting discussion because then the security people usually they found out that what you need as a researcher is very so sometimes people say these crazy researchers they want all kind of stuff that we don't have in our store, and why do they want this crazy stuff, and but then they learn why you want to do experiments not in academia but at a certain location where things take place. So this is where the youth are that you want to observe and so on. Okay. So now I understand that why you ask these things, why you need this camera and so on. And then they can all the security people can also assess what the risks are, but also come up with the security countermeasures. And then sometimes you get this other dimension that the privacy people say, yeah, well, there's a risk involved there, or the legal people say there's a risk involved, should not do this. But then when the legal people understand what the purpose of the academic is, then they understand, okay, this is a risk that we need to take, right? So we need to do it, and there's a learning curve. The next time when these people are in the same room, they will start at a higher level of understanding each other. And sometimes the researcher will say, I need all this data, but then it really does not need to be all that data, and we can do a smaller set or so on. So there's a learning curve doing a DPIA and describing what you learn from this. The last takeaway is if you do a DPIA, it doesn't need to be on every individual research project. You can do it on types of research. So if you do a survey research and you have identified all kinds of risk and countermeasures, you can say, okay, we know as a university what the risks are involved with surveys. This is the list. We've done the DPIA, look here, and every type of survey research we do, we take the same measures. Same for other types of interviews or other kinds of research methods. So this is where we can cut on the administration. Don't do DPIA for every individual research project. I know I'm this crazy guy from Rotterdam who says these things, but it says so in the GDPR. You can do it on a category of processings. Doesn't need to be every individual one. But then legal people sometimes say, well, it's not 100% identical to the other one. So my approach would be, okay, if it's 80% identical, just define the 20% as different and come up with solutions for that, but don't do the rest again, because it's not supposed to be administrative burden, right? But you need to understand what the risks are. We know what they are. We have measures we have measures in place, and this is how we go about. So these are the risk factors, and in these cases you really should do a DPIA, but you're also always free to do a DPIA. I have a lot of information, but yeah, let's take it. Yeah, you have a question. You get the mic, I think.
So I find these slides on the DPIA very interesting because actually one of the use cases that we are now set it up for biomed, it's computational biomedicine community using the services of DICE, which Claudia showed a slide on. We are now trying to assist a use case that has data stored in some safe data haven in the UK, and this data need to be replicated to sites in the Netherlands and in Barcelona, so that this data can be used in simulations running on supercomputers and all kind of different interesting research. But it all now comes down for this use case to be able to happen, that we need to have a risk assessment. Because this data, as I said, is stored in a safe data haven in the UK, and the data owner, the principal investigator or the professor has said that that is okay for this data to be shared, but still the party that is hosting the data says, no, it's not okay. We cannot just let the data out because this data is stored here for some reason in the first place, and there might be as you said, privacy or confidentiality involved. So, well, you already elaborated who needs to be involved in such a risk assessment, someone from security, privacy, and researcher itself. But in this case, that multiple parties are involved, like from UK, but also in the Netherlands, in Europe, it's not clear to me who should take responsibility on making such an assessment. Is it the data owner or the partner that is hosting the data or owns the data, or should it be done in collaboration with those who are going to later process this data? Or so it's, yeah. I thought maybe raising this question could help.
Yeah. For sure.
To give a real example of the challenges that we face in the field, let's say. So.
I think it would be great, Santosh, if we could use this use case this afternoon.
Sure, I didn't get all the details.
Yeah, but
yeah.
But the generic answer is in terms of responsibilities. I didn't say that earlier, but there's two roles. You are either a controller in terms of data processing or a processor. Generally, in research, people have a controller role because of their academic responsibility. You cannot say to an academic, you do this, but everyone has their own responsibility, and they come up with their own purpose and their own, so they're responsible for their own way. So what you get is a consortium of mutually responsible people. Multiple controllers agreeing on what needs to be done, and then. But then this can also be really a big legal puzzle if you. So probably there's a consortium agreement where you define who brings in which knowledge and what is in the background and so on, and it is in that context that you define, okay, who gets to say what happens with the data. So if you bring in data and you probably are member of the consortium because you have this data, then you get to say something about this. If you create something together, then you together get to say something about what happens with that created data. If you are the body that has the analytic power, then yeah, and so on. So you can really strip it down, and everything happens under the responsibility of the principal investigator. But you should typically do this at the early stages of the marriage, not. And sometimes people say, yeah, well, we do this after when we've started, but then there's trouble in the marriage, and then the consortium dies, and people are in fights and so on, and then you have a real problem.
Yeah, that was indeed one of the lessons learned, that if we could have thought about this in the early phase of where we were setting up this platform for collaboration and sharing, and it would have helped. But this particular use case came up all somewhat toward the end of the collaboration. So in that sense, we couldn't have done much.
Yeah.
But you said something about signing. They did say we need to share a data sharing agreement.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you are referring to.
Yeah.
Within the consortium, and they are willing to sign such an agreement. But we can
Cool.
maybe discuss this
Yeah.
case more in detail offline. But,
Yeah, and we will learn most from these cases. So this is just context, and I think the cases will be the real pièce de résistance, right? So when this is when we learn, and all the specific contextual stuff that is related to them.
Yeah.
Because one thing I wanted to add still is there's a lot of technology developed in over the last few years, and sometimes you can even visit data. So you can send your data, well, to the algorithms to the data, and the data does not need to move. So the idea of the data, where does the data sit, and there's all kinds of, well, we get to the mitigating measures in a bit, but sometimes when someone says it cannot move because X, I, Y, Z, and so on, you can look at different strategies to still process the data without it being moved. But it usually helps if you have, so what you need is infrastructure and so on, but also time to think about sometimes differences per work package, and it needs to be manageable also. And but that is, I think, what we will see in the later on so how you can use this tooling for.
We had one question also in the chat, and this is another Marlon. So we will see if this works. He will now unmute and then ask the question, and we will see if we can hear it. Otherwise, I read it out loud.
Good.
Hello? Can you hear me? No, I don't think so.
So Marlon, the Marlon in the chat from the Ruk, please go ahead. I tried. Okay, so apparently it does not work. Too
Sorry. Oh. The
Okay.
people in the chat hear me, so the online people.
Unfortunately, we don't hear the question in the room, so then I will still read it out. Sorry. Can you define a category to do a DPR on beforehand, or can you decide not to do a DPR anymore because you already have a reference DPR?
I think, yeah, I did not. I will see to it that you get this information at a later stage. I've been working on this for some time. I think there's 8 or 9 basically research scenarios based on certain choices that you make, and I think the choices are what is the nature of the data, what is the nature of the collaboration, what are the geographical aspects, because of if data is shared with people from outside Europe, then there's a different regime and so on, and based on these 3 categories, you can have 2 sets, I think, if you do research alone, and if you do research in a group, then this is the legal framework, I think, for your DPS. And it would be really great if we would do this on a not only a national level, but on a European level. Then we would have make it 10 or 12 DPS as reference DPS for research purposes. That would be really great. And the reason, and I have I've been struggling with this for, I think, more than yeah, 7 years, and there's some. So there's a premature version, but the list I'm thinking about now is a very short list, and it already gives you clues on what kind of legal documents you need to have in place to do so. If you work alone, you don't need data sharing agreements and so on. But so you have a lot is about the data. Is it big scale? Is it sensitive? Is it licensed data and so on? So the data is interesting. The people that you collaborate with and the geography of stuff. I have some slides that are hinting at this, but that will be an approach. Yes.
So not on specific research projects, you do this, but on types of.
Yeah. I can specify the place in the GDPR where it says that you can do that you can do so, and so in order to get there, I've I've been trying for some time to get people to embrace this idea because it will help us, and logically it will save us a lot of time if we do it together, and if we agree on a on this level, this category level of DPA. But I think in order to do so, we must understand what risks are. And this is why I came up with this slide. So you need to identify risks, you need to categorize them, you need to prioritize them, and then you come up with your real risk assessment. What is the likelihood and what is the impact of the risk? And then what are your controls and do they work? And this is how it could look like. So this is from last year. Um, in the end, even in a consortium, and this is where it gets problematic, you need to have some boundaries. You need to have some policies, right? And usually policies are conflicting. Policies between universities individually are sometimes conflicting, but also if you collaborate with private organizations, there can be conflicts in what is in policies. But look at this from your own organization. So you probably have some kind of risk policy. In our case, for instance, and this is also based on risk frameworks. It could be helpful to identify between strategic risk, external risk, and operational risk. Strategic risk are, of course, yeah, they should be handled differently. But what is a risk is not a risk, right? So, and some operational risk are you can just manage by just training people and yeah, create better operational excellence, as it were, to mitigate those operational risks. The strategic risks, of course, are the important ones. Then you should really. So I'm following the upper green flow. What should we do with them? Some risks are work package 4. We have some time to still come up with measures. We start with 1 and 2 and so on. But so you don't have to do everything. You need to have your stuff ready when you start, but not necessarily a year in advance or so on. So when do we take action, and then what is the likelihood and the impact? What I noticed in with risk assessment, that people go crazy with the impact side of the risk assessment, but forget to come up with criteria for the likelihood. So if the likelihood is 0 and the impact is very big, then the risk cannot be high. But so there's lots of books, right? That people are not so good in statistical thinking and risk assessment in general, and people make all kinds of mistakes and thinking in these concepts and so on. So we know this is difficult, and this is typically what happens. People say, so for instance, from another context, you have to do a data transfer impact assessment, a DATA, when you for instance, work with people in America, with a third country, you need to do also data. Perhaps we can discuss this also. then you again have to do this, and then you have to also consider is there problematic legislation in that country, in America, that is relevant for your data processing, for instance. And then you have things like the Cloud Act and FISA, the Executive Order 12333, and then you have to assess how does this affect this data processing and so on. And what you see, for instance, if we work with Microsoft, and we do, we need to do the same stuff. And Microsoft said, if we are asked by any agency or governmental body or government to hand over the data, we don't do so. We go to court. That is the reason, by the way, why America came up with the Cloud Act, because Microsoft didn't collaborate, and they had to have a legal ground to do so. So Microsoft said you can find on their website, and this is a very specific case. You can see in there, this is called a transparency statement, in which they state what they do when somebody asks them to hand over data. You can see how many of these requests they got and how they acted upon them. And there's legislation, the FISA Act, that is relevant in this case. And because of the FISA Act, you are only allowed to say, we have received 1 to 500, somewhere between 1 and 500 of these requests, and in 0 to 500 cases we did such and such. But Microsoft went a bit further last year, and they said we did 0 in 0 cases. So they named a specific number. In 0 cases, we handed over data to U.S. Government. There's a distinction, right? If there's a legal case and there's this was referring to bulk data, right? But if there's a legal case, then they hand over data, because that's the way things work. If there's, but the problematic part was not the legal system in the country, but the bulk data collection. And so in this case, we already know that bulk data is not going to be delivered by Microsoft to an organization. So the likelihood of happening is 0, but the impact would probably be great. But people still, and there was a DPIA performed by an organization in the Netherlands, people still said, okay, the impact is high. We still have one high risk. And this is how it works. So logically it doesn't add up, but and this is the way it works. So before we can have these, say, high level DPIAs on types of research, I think we need to be in the clear about, say, the footwork to get to this risk assessment and the mitigating measures. I think so, but that's not for you. I hope we can create this so that you can do your work better. But these are the difficulties, I think, that we see. And there's, as you can see, there's risk assessment is not new in the banks and in other. So we can learn a lot from other sectors, and we can just so. Yeah. Yes. So I'll be taking your time until 4 o'clock. Then Santosh will take over. The last 50 minutes, I will just wait and see which topics or questions or anything also not related to what I've said, but related to the GDPR and research is coming up. So please interrupt me or use the last 50 minutes before 4 o'clock. Let me see. In my quest, you remember before the break, we said something about risk risk criteria, and one of them was the nature of your collaboration, the geography aspects, and the data aspects. And this is how I came up with. This is actually an exercise I do with people. Just describe your research project. What is the nature of the collaboration? What is the nature of the geographical aspects of the partners in the group? and what is the nature of the data, and then come up with, so fill in these boxes and what should you do during planning and data collection, data structure, and so on, just to make it very practical. And this is your one pager that you can actually use for your work package or your research group. And there's a very limited set of, I must say, limited set of measures and of things you can do. So in most cases, there will be some overlap, but this is a very practical way to look at things. Sometimes people forget that. So if you talk about collaboration, you sometimes forget that tooling is also a way of not so much collaboration, but data sharing with other partners. And so I try to basically say the same thing in different ways. And this is another way of saying the same thing. So if you do your research and the research cycle or the research process is in the icons above, from data collection to data archiving or data deletion, think about your collaborators, and what is the legal stuff that you have to take into account? What are the measures that they have to take into account? So this is again a different view on the same topic.
Sorry, Marlon.
Yes.
The remote slides did not change. We are remotely on a different slide.
Let me see.
No, it's fine.
So okay, so how are we going to fix that? 1 second. Probably, can you see it now? Can you see?
No, it's perfect.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So tooling can involve data sharing also, and then you need to have some legal documents in place, and there's also a limited variation in that. I just wanted to show you this perspective, and here is again the research, not a cycle, but the research process, and how it looks like in reality if you collaborate. You have academia, you have hospitals, you have industry, you have conflicting policies in terms of open access, fair, but also GDPR, this is typically this is not so uncommon. So this is one of the projects I helped. And what we found in the beginning is that for the first phases, stuff is in place. So you can do you can write your proposal with the research group, and when you start, then you need to have access to all the tools, right, and the platforms. And the situation now is so much better than in 2018 when we started, when the GDPR, it's 5 years old that the GDPR is in place last week, but there much has happened in those 5 years, I think. And we will see that in the next sessions and also tomorrow and over the day afterwards. But this is reality. And then you think, okay, and this refers to, I think, the example, the showcase that we've had. So can people from this country have access to data in that country? And how do what is the access matrix that goes with that, and what is it based on? I would really like to have on a national level or European level just templates for that stuff. I also shared with you, I think, a consent form. We will get to that later, but if we could share these things with each other, then it would make life so much easier, I think. Okay, so that was in terms of collaboration, just a view. Retention periods, fair data and archiving. I'm just going to set my clock because I really forget. Yeah. So I think this time frame, but you see it gets busy around 2015 and so on, and with all kinds of European developments, and then the GDPR starts, but also Plan S and FAIR starts, and And basically what happens is all kinds of misunderstanding. Is open data, is it the same as fair data? We now know that there's differences, of course, but in the beginning there was a lot of misunderstanding because we started with open access for the publications, and now the data was also in scope. And I remember Commissioner from Portugal, Carlos Moedas, and he said he wrote this paper, the 3 O's, open to society, and the 3 O's of open, and also open to society, and open for research purposes. I forgot the 3rd O, I must say, but this paper was, and at that time I was still working in research data management, and that was really an eye opener. We had a lot of conferences on open and on fair and on privacy, the topics connecting together. And then he said, okay, and actually the European Commission and Europe said, as open as possible and as close as necessary. That was around that time, and that is the basic gist of it. If you can anonymize data, you can be as open as you want, and if you can pseudonymize data, you have to make sure that you control who has access to the data, because otherwise you lose your control. So you can put it in infrastructure that you can trust. And I was at a conference once in Brussels, and I forgot his name now. The European sponsor for open science, I forget his name. I get to, sorry, you know, he retired now, and he's a professor at VUB now. Do you know, perhaps, I forgot his name, really. So this is a bad session. But I asked him, do you, Burgelman, Professor Burgelman, and I asked him, do you consider it to be for research purposes? Do you consider data to be open at the National Statistics Bureau of the Netherlands? Because for research purposes, the data is available and open, but not for the public, not free online for everyone. And he agreed, and he said that is a way to look at fair data. It is open for research purposes. You need to check who needs to have access to it. And then I thought, okay, so the future for me is data hubs and controlled data hubs, where you can have growing data sets and data collections. You can have access controls. It does not need to be necessarily open and free and available online for everyone, but for research purposes, even the microdata from National Bureau of Statistics was considered by him, and I see him as an authority, as part of the fair infrastructure. So I was happy with that, and of course I believe in the European Open Science Cloud, but you need to have components, and you needed to have starting points, and I think that was for me an important point. It does not need to be open for everyone, and if it's possible, of course, then we can have it, but you can also protect privacy rights better in those more closed environments, and that is where the two meet, right? Where as open as possible and as close as necessary. Okay, I'm going to skip to consent. So consent is, so people usually when they hear about the GDPR, they say, oh, you need to do a DPI, you need to have consent, and you need to do, and there needs to be data sharing agreement or something. But but actually consent is one of the, so this is, I have to warn you, this is a bit, it's a personal statement, and I can clarify why it is personal, but so there's 6 legal grounds in the GDPR that you can use to process personal data. And in academia, it's usually one of 3. So public interest, legitimate interest, or consent. And that's basically it. And we try to do at Erasmus University, we try to do as much as we can with public interest. So our university is, it has a bit of a legal background because the law that that defines the purpose and the regulations of our university, de Wet Hoger Onderwijs en Wetenschappen, defines that we are a public body for the public good, and that our primary targets, primary processes are education and research, and we do research for the public good. So and we share it in public documents. And this is also why you can set up an argument that you do research based on a public interest. And the GDPR, there are some articles that state that you have to really publish it, and the Publication Act makes it public. And the problem, of course, starts with processing of sensitive data, because then you cannot rely on for the processing of sensitive data, you cannot rely on the legal ground of public interest, because of the higher regime of protection, you need to have consent. And in the Netherlands, that is defined also in the implementation legislation, Article 24, where you really must go for consent for that part, because people need to be aware and understand what you're doing with their data. The thing with public interest is that sometimes people say, well, you cannot do public interest because people then they don't get to say, they're not well informed. And people also say, informed consent, stuff like that. Well, informed consent is something different from another legislation, medical legislation. But consent, so I have some. Okay. So typically for medical treatment, you need to consent for the treatment, and you need to have consent for the processing of personal data. But and some people say it's in the GDPR you also have informed consent, and this is something that will never go away, but it's something different. But the consent only refers to the data processing. But you still have, and I don't know if you remember this, but the Article 5, the circle with the Article 5 principles also had the transparency principle. You still have to be transparent. You still have to communicate what you do with the data and so on. And so that is always one of your responsibilities if you process data. And this is a way, and I've shared this one, I think, the consent form here, and there's different ones. I'm really proud of the team, privacy officer team. Bo Scheven in particular, she was leading a project in which in which we now have consent forms that kids can understand. That was really interesting to go through these panels and to get rid of all the jargon and the difficult words, and to now have also icons, but also very friendly basic wording that makes it very easy for people to understand what's happening. And that was a learning process for us also. So we want to keep some legal words in it because we think it's important, but is it important to understand what we're doing with the data? And in most cases, and we learned a lot from that. So but that's in Dutch. I can still share it with you, but I will share it with you. And that took quite some time, but I think we're happy with that also. And there are some, I will also share some great examples. So some people really were creative, and if you look at this document, it looks really boring, right? But they use different fonts and more colors and more images and so on. It looked more pleasing for the target group, sometimes kids, or minors to understand what's happening. That is also a great way to do that, and I like to use icons myself, but there's more ways to inform people in a nice way. So I will add some documents there. So consent, One of the legal grounds, you should have it if you process sensitive data. And it also means if you use consent that people can withdraw consent. We've made some. We have some wording in the consent form that up until so if people give consent from that moment on, you have a legal ground to process personal data. If they withdraw consent, then up until the time that they withdrew their consent, the processing is legitimate. So then and the question is, do you have to still delete the data that was processed before? If someone withdraws consent, we still have to withdraw the data, delete the data that was processed up until that time. And you could say that if you use privacy by design, and if you anonymize, or say strongly pseudonymize your data, and if you cannot find the people anymore in your data set, then it becomes really impractical and practically impossible to identify people in the data set and to delete them from it. And this is something that you can say also in your consent form. We ask your consent up until the time that you withdraw your consent. Our processing is legal, but we do it in such a way that it is because we do not need your first level, so personal level data. For instance, in some research projects, it's not necessary to understand the personal level data, but you want to, you focus on the trends and so on. So we strip the data set from that kind of data that links it to you. So it makes it hard for us to identify you in the data set. But you need to also be transparent about that in advance, so you can share that in your consent form. I've seen it once, and then someone said, "Well, I've given some answers in the open field or in the open text answers, and based on that, we could identify who that person was and so on." But I only saw it once, and usually if you are transparent and honest about what you're doing in your processing, then and everything goes well, and you don't have data breaches, then people usually won't use their privacy rights in terms of access rights and right to be forgotten and all these things. This is just to say that if you do your risk assessment, then you can also put the risks in documents such as the consent forms. And that is what you also need to share with people, right? So what are the reasonable risks I see for you if you participate in this research project? Just skipping a bit, just moving along a bit better, faster. Privacy and ethics. So some people so I have a background in philosophy, so I like to think about ethics. And for me, many of the really important stuff starts with ethics. Some people also use the term awful lawful. It is legally allowed, but should we want to do this? And this is what this picture is for. So there's a lot of stuff that we like to do. Some things are not just technically possible. Some things are not legally allowed. And some things, smaller set, is the set that we really should want. And this is something that people say, well, this is not in the GDPR, and this is not, and this is not in the context of the GDPR. But I think topics like data ethics, and even if you're aware of the processings in algorithms and so on, the ethics topic will come up again. I have a very, I stole it from Immanuel Kant. I have a very practical solution. 2 questions I ask to people when they come to me with a proposal that I think is not ethical. The first question I ask them, and I noticed many people have similar approaches, but I ask them, okay, if your proposal would be on the front page of tomorrow's paper, would you be comfortable then? some people then start thinking and say, oh yeah, maybe not, maybe you have to do something then. And then some people will still say, yeah, it's okay if it's on tomorrow's newspaper. Then I asked the next question, and that really does it. Okay, if your minor daughter would be part of this research project, would you be comfortable with this? And then sometimes for the first time, a researcher will take the perspective of the data subject, the research participant. That is really all that I need as a DPO to have a real conversation with someone. Is this something that, because I asked, would you be comfortable if you did it to yourself? Yeah, of course. And I noticed if your minor son was not selective enough, your minor daughter was the best one. And some people ask the same question, would you do this to your mother? And depending on what your relation is with your mother or your mother-in-law, then perhaps there will be different answers. But I think the best one is your imaginary minor daughter, and I think that one works. And that is of course by, and you should not. People are not a means to an end, but they are the end in itself. So look at their what's happening to them and what you do to them. Just wanted to throw that in, and I like this picture because it tells a lot. Privacy by design. You get all the the highlights in a very short time now. Privacy by design, coined by. I'm really bad at names now. Oh, this is really bad. Yeah. Canadian. Oh, this is so bad. This is. I have no explanation for this. Anne Kavukian. Sorry, just had to relax a bit. Anne Kavukian. She came up with the foundational principles of privacy by design. She's still active in the field. She does a lot of great work still, and we should all know her name. But and she came up with these foundational principles. Some of them speak a bit for themselves. I just wanted to focus a bit on number 4, the full functionality, positive sum, not zero sum. That one took the longest for me to understand, because sometimes you get these sort of rhetoric false dilemmas, right? COVID, we need to sacrifice a bit of privacy because of public health. There's a balance, and you get this picture. Okay, so one has to let go, and because of the other, and the result is the sum game. But she says it can be positive sum, not zero sum. You can have both privacy and public health, but you just have to think harder and better and come up with strategies to do so. And I believe so. You need, this is where the privacy enhancing technologies come in, and all the things we can do to make sure that yeah, the mistakes are not made. So that one is, I think, is really interesting. We also, in the Netherlands, we have our own privacy by design hero in the person of Jaap Henk Hoepman. He wrote this little blue book. It's in Dutch and it's in English, and he also he does a lot of things, and he also was participant in many papers by ENISA on privacy by design. There are 2 important reports on privacy by design and privacy by design on big data, which has different measures. And he came up with this framework where you have actually data and process-oriented strategies. So this is the short cut. So I made. So there's I think so. There's 4 data-oriented strategies: minimize, separate, abstract, and there's you can see what your portfolio is in terms of measures. You can do stuff on data, and you can do stuff on the process, and you can get in control of your processing by implementing these measures. So so you can, for instance, you can hide data by obfuscating or dissociating or mixing data and so on. So it's actually it's very practical, and there's a lot more you can do than just minimize. And people will always say, oh, data needs to be secured, so you have to do data minimization and data encryption. But you can see already here that there's a lot more things you can do. Synthetic data and large steps through the field. So these are some of the books that are very interesting. There are other books also. I love. I was in a masterclass by Khaled El Imam. The book on the bottom is the first of his books, and then he wrote some other O'Reilly books. Then and he's actually created the framework for anonymizing health data. I can really recommend these books to you. His company was bought by Privacy Analytics, and the 5 Safes is also by his organization. So that is where I get my inspiration from in terms of anonymizing and pseudonymization. But then he sold his company and he started a new company creating synthetic data, and that is also very interesting. I just wanted to, so he made a big step. And what is the who of you already works with synthetic data? And could you say what is the use case for synthetic data? Could you?
So, in my case, I control that.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to have some examples in my paper. So I picked myself as a master student. I think I won't pick St. Nicholas. I just had a couple of these just to show like what it would look like, the results.
Oh, great. And I saw someone else using synthetic data. Is there someone using large data sets, synthetic data sets already? Okay, thank you. Yeah. So one way of looking at synthetic data is that you create a data set that has certain statistic qualities that are similar within certain boundaries with a real data set, but are not the real data set, and thus are synthetic data or funny data, but you can work with them, and it's not personal data. So indeed, for demonstration purposes, or even if you work in IT for testing, this could really work, and you don't need to have real personal data to do so. Also for other use cases, for education purposes, how do we, you need large data sets to do your analysis on, or and that do not need to be real data sets, right? So that are those are use cases for synthetic data, but also for rare diseases. People, and this is where the discussion usually starts about representation of the data points, and if we have data sets that are small, how can we grow the data set to do A/B testing and to create, to be able to test things and still have representative data to test algorithms with and so on. But there are different. I just wanted to mention that one of the purposes can be to have data sets that you can learn stuff with, and I think for real scientific application, you still need to look very well at. You need to consider very well the boundaries that are in place. Um, um, but one of the use cases that could work legally is this thing. You have Alice. She's the data. She has authorized authorized access. She has legitimate access to a database. And you have Bob, the analyst, who does not have legal access to the database. So this is what happens when patient data is protected. And so here we have health data, for instance, that is not accessible for research purposes because it was not collected for research purposes, and health data is protected for other purposes. But Bob is interested in data, in creating algorithms to investigate something, and in this use case, Alice could create from the real data set specified by Bob, so a section of patients, for instance, could create a synthetic data set, which is not personal data, could give the synthetic data set to Bob and have him train an algorithm. Then Bob could hand over the algorithm to Alice, and Alice could perform the algorithm on the data set and could get the findings, so the results, and share within certain boundaries, share the results with Bob. That is a way, there's an approach that is tested and executed to solve the problem that you cannot use patient data for your research. This is an approach. I just wanted to share this with you. Of course, you need to tell the patients that you process the data if you create a synthetic data set based on their data. That is also a form of processing that you need to tell people, but so in terms of transparency. But this is interesting, I think. It's a new way of thinking, and it clearly identifies problems and comes up with solutions. Yeah, so there's a more detailed, there's a link and there's a lot of documentation and also in the book. These are additional slides, which I'm not going to do because I just wanted to check, are there other topics? And of course, we will have a hands-on session in a bit, but are there some general remarks or questions or problems with aspects? If so, then please just state your question.
So we are getting in questions from the remote.
Cool.
Maybe, John, let's try this again. Can you unmute yourself and just read out this question loud? Because I think then everyone should be able to hear. The remote and read in the room. So John is now my...
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, great. This is actually about the DICE management, data management services. As you well know, the DICE project was created in order to support researchers. And in fact, we have developed sensitive data management services that we are demonstrating in the Datathon. But you mentioned earlier that commercial data was also had its own aspects, and we have had problems talking with commercial enterprises to convince them that the DICE services were also relevant to them. They seem to have a lot of reservations, and you indicated that there probably may well be reason for reservations, for example, intellectual property theft. Is there anything that the DICE people could either say to them or what they would have to do extra in order to also appeal to the commercial users?
I have two answers. One is I would love to think with you about this specific case and come up with answers because I would need some additional context. And the other one is usually if people say no, there's also some politics in place, and that is something that we can that the GDPR doesn't help you with. But I would love to do a deep dive. So usually so people are sometimes afraid that they lose also the commercials, that they lose control over their data. But if you can be transparent about who does what and so on, then that could probably be solved. But so people need to have some guarantees, and sometimes guarantees come with ISO certifications, and not many organizations have that in place. And so it's about, I think, in general, about these maturity kind of say evidence, proof of evidence that you are in control of your data. And then it becomes so national. So CBS, National Bureau of Statistics, has those in place and so on. If you so usually it helps when you get them on board, and if they have a central role in this. But I would need to look at specifics. So sometimes politics, and sometimes just pointing to the important forms of evidence that we have agreed in the sectors.
Thank you.
There is another remote question, so maybe we can try this again. Iris, do you dare to unmute and speak up?
Yeah, thank
There's
you.
also
Can
a
you hear
question
me?
here.
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Malon, for your nice presentation. I was wondering, yeah, it's a bit off topic related to the slides you presented, but maybe could you please perhaps share your view on human materials in the context of GDPR? So the discussion was mainly about digital data, but at my university, researchers often use tissues or cells, and I was wondering, does it always fall under GDPR since those samples contain DNA? And what if researchers don't do genetic analysis on them and just use those cells and tissues for other purposes?
I'm afraid I cannot answer your question.
Oh.
So no, because there's specific legislation, and there's also, we had a great session 2 weeks ago by Hanneke, Lut, and Ingrid on the specific developments within health data and the European health data space, and that is a bit too tricky for me to now to say. So I cannot really make useful statements on material. I must say, the only thing that the GDPR considers is the processing of the data that is usually on the labels and in the metadata of the material. But that's not the answer. So I will ask this question, and I will get back to you on this. And I think I'll see how Irit and Hanneke can answer this question, because they are to me the field experts.
Thank you so much.
Put this question on the digital package.
Yeah, if you define your question specifically, then you'll get a better answer.
There are no remote questions anymore.
There's one here still.
So my question was actually related to the question asked by John from Remote. You gave a nice definition of sensitive data in your first slide, that it's a special category of personal data.
Yeah.
And this for me immediately triggered that, okay, I'm missing those data that are also categorized as sensitive in the commercial sector. So my question is, in what you present in the training today, is that sensitive data, is that category of sensitive data out of scope, or what you are presenting here for these sensitive data that are personal and fall under GDPR, would the same more or less apply for those kind of sensitive data, like from the commercial sector, that are, for whatever reason, commercial reasons, considered sensitive?
Yeah. Yeah, I left it out of the scope for this talk, because, but I'm happy to address it. I think the way the measures you take and the risk you assess relating to sensitive data, also from a commercial flavor, will lead to the same measures in terms of access restriction and encryption and things you can do by design. We use a certain platform, an end-to-end. I'm not going to say names, but we use a certain platform end-to-end encrypted, and and we have at the Erasmus University, and we have very much control of access and data, the document rights. We can state if someone can download it or just view it online, or just view it online for half an hour, and just view it online for half an hour with only the text visible where the cursor is, so that you cannot easily make copies of it with an Excel. So, and these tools I know are also used at not only by the secret services and banks, but also by Nike and so on, because the designs are of course heavily protected, and people have access in the factories have access to these designs. I think by tablets, but only one way and for a certain amount of time, yeah, so you get the same line of reasoning. So sensitive data needs some kind of protection, and the reason can be also commercial, indeed. Yeah. Okay, then thank you so much for your questions and your attention. I have some homework still, and because I promised you to do some stuff additionally, but I think now the floor is for Santosh, my esteemed colleague from the TU Delft. And as he joins the stage, I forgot to do one more thing, and is to mention the relevance. So just one more minute. The relevance, the relation with the training that he and I both were engaged in, and other people. So we created this, and this PDF is available also for you. And we created this document in different modules. It's basically the same story. It's more text. It's more structured. But you will find everything in here, and also some of the examples I showed are in here. So this is a somewhat longer document with a lot of links also to the articles if you want to read the GDPR articles. But that is I think the reason why we started communicating about this topic based on this Dutch version of a web interface by RDNL, sponsored by RDNL, and now I think the English version is also about to become available, and Claudia will probably, whenever it's due, communicate this. But that is the relevance. So that's just another way of presenting the same information, I think.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining this DICE Datathon session. I'm Santosh Ilamparuti. I'm here with Marlon for today and tomorrow morning sessions. So just a quick about myself. As I mentioned, I'm Santosh. I'm a data steward for the Electrical Engineering, Mathematics, and Computer Science faculty at TU Delft. I've been a data steward since 2019, and essentially at TU Delft, data stewards act as one-stop shop for all your RDM-related questions, or research data management-related questions. I do have a special interest in personal data and research, mostly because my faculty requires a lot of that support. Coming in, I did not expect any personal data. Computer science and electrical engineers, what could they do? Turns out a lot. The lion's share of my time is actually dedicated to personal data support, and it's continuing to grow, and we have more and more complex cases. Some of the things discussed today will be based on cases that I've encountered and my colleagues have encountered. I'm also a keen supporter of open science. We've developed an open source course for personal data and research at TU Delft, and this was now debuting already, and we're prepping it so that it's available for everybody. We have some videos and also interactive content that requires a platform like Brightspace and other things to work fully. So we're trying to see how best to share it. We might just have videos and not the full interactive possibilities available for everybody, but it will be open source. I'm also part of the open science team and project lead for open hardware. So if anybody is involved in open hardware, any interest, that's always something I'd like to pitch. My background is in mechanical engineering. It's a past life, research in computational fluid dynamics. So if you have questions on that, let's have that later. All right. So what we're going to do is in this working session is that we're going to be working in teams. So people in person here, and those of you who are joining online, you should be able to do everything we're doing here just by yourself. I don't know that we have any way for you to group you together, but I think working individually would be just fine for you as well. We will be using, just give me 1 second, I'm just going to adjust my screen a little bit. We'll be using the risk and mitigations approach to address the case studies we'll be looking at, and we'll be using real life cases that data stewards like myself and my colleagues at TU Delft have faced at TU Delft. We'll be modifying them to protect identities and not disclose all the details and things like that to protect their privacy, but also general safety for that. One thing working on personal data I've learned is that knowing how to address the issues themselves is more important than, say, having some sort of cookie cutter solution that you feel like you can just port onto. One of my favorite things is like, oh, I can just anonymize my data, right? As a standard line, starting off with something that I quickly learned was not really an answer that fits most times. Finally, as I mentioned, this what we're discussing today, the material is based on what we've developed at TU Delft. The people listed there, I was part of the team that developed it. So hat tip to everybody there. It was a year-long project that took all of last year to fully put together. So we hope you find it useful. Okay, so first off, if I can move the slide. I changed, right? Yeah. Okay, we're going to be using the risks and mitigations approach to handling personal data. We're going to be using a system where we essentially have 7 aspects of identifying risks, and then essentially we'll be trying to mitigate them based on what we've been identified. So the idea is that I'll be handling this session and the section after this, and then the first session tomorrow morning. So we will go through one full case study in all its myriad formats today, and for the second case, I will introduce it. And the idea is that you essentially do a little bit of homework, prep and discuss it so that tomorrow morning we'll have a 45-minute session where we can discuss through it. I do see this as a thoroughly interactive session. So please feel free to interrupt me, both people online and in person here, because really the cases only work when there's a discussion. It is designed to be worked through by discussion. Even when you're working in teams, please raise your hands, and Marlon is here as well. He'll be able to answer general questions, and I can feed a little bit more specific to the case as well, so everybody is informed. Okay. Okay, so 7 aspects to identifying risk. So the general ones are partners and collaborations. This can introduce specific types of risk. Location risks, as in where you're conducting the research. Participant risks, specifically faced by participants. Recruiting participants, how you go about actually getting the people to participate in your study. That process presents specific risk. Subject matter, what it is that you're actually studying. So usually when we talk about risks, we tend to jump to that one. But do remember that that is just one aspect of a whole myriad possibility of complications. The research methods used. Are you doing a survey? Are you doing interviews? Are you collecting data in person, online? And are you doing a very large-scale longitudinal study, etc.? And data and privacy, what those specific things are. So as you can see in the list, there are a lot of factors that might not become immediately apparent when you're first entering. I think that should be kept in mind. Then essentially, once we've identified that, mitigation to risk identified above should be implemented. So essentially, what happens, the interesting questions come here where you try to attempt to address the risk, but then what happens if suitable mitigations cannot be found, and how to make risks acceptable, right? So there is no such thing as zero risk. Very rarely will you confront something like that. So the question is not that can you eliminate all risks, but can you essentially bring the risk threshold down sufficiently so that the risk is acceptable? So the question then immediately becomes acceptable to whom, and that needs to be somewhat negotiated, figured out what exactly you're trying to do. You would talk to your legal department, your ethics department, what the regulations say. Regulations are updated over time, what the law says, what the courts decide, and that can influence what you can and can't do. Okay, so now what we're going to do now is first, I'm going to present the case. So I'm going to give you a project background and a couple of more, 2 more slides after that, after this one, to give you an overview of the project. At which point in time, I'd like to ask the people in the room now, how many people are here? Could you raise your hands quickly? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, so ideally, if you can form into groups between 4 and 5 people and kind of cluster together, right? Because I would want you to discuss amongst yourself on what you want to do. So that would be good. If you can move yourselves now, that's fine as well. And people online, you'll be doing it individually, so not an issue. Can you create breakout? And then everybody would be doing individually. That is fine as well. I was planning for teamwork, but the main reason being that we want people to discuss. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I thought, like, individually, so everybody can ask questions, and yeah. So we have a 4, 3. I think that should be good. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to jump into the case. The first one, the one we're going to be dealing for majority today, is design of working/living environment, a research topic that was done at UDEL. So the project background is this. Due to the 2019-2022 pandemic, more and more people started working from home. This project essentially aims to identify elements in the combined working living environment and suggest customized designs for different user groups based on the type of activities and living and working conditions that they face. The project involves gathering information on the new work-life physical setup of the general population since the start of the COVID of the pandemic. It will also follow with a reflection on how this organization benefits people or hinders their work-life balance. Finally, it will suggest different spatial organization based on the different type of work-life setups that have been observed. All right. This project will adopt a combined participatory approach in data collection and designs of work-life environment. To achieve this, frequent interactions between the researchers and participants are necessary. And a key aspect of this research is the use of VR environment to design the work-life spaces and allow people to try them out. Okay. Don't worry if you're looking reading the text. There's a separate document where when you're actually discussing, you'll be able to look at the text as much as you like. All right. Okay, so we have 2 more sections on the research plan, both data collection and data publishing. All right. So data collection. The discovery of current work-life setups will be done by surveying through social media and collecting images and descriptions of new work spaces, as well as existing academic literature on it. This leads to the design of test environments, and the participants are asked to evaluate. Focus group approach will be used to collect feedback, reflections on the different interior arrangements. The suggested designs of the work-life spaces will be done in 3D with a supported platform allowing for VR tools to be used. The data collected during this experiment is summarized below. Social media images for various sources from copyright with various copyrights. Online group session, voice recording, transcription of interaction for analysis, virtual models of work environment, assessment of the environment by participants. So test results will be collected through interviews with the participants after the VR experiment is completed. Okay. And finally, data publishing. Right. So in the publishing case, the research team expects to share the results and approach in the following ways. Public report with visuals such as pictures of the VR setup to illustrate how they ran the evaluation of the virtual work environment. Public display of the work environment designs they considered to create the optimal work environment. And then finally, public display of the work environment designs they created and tested. Now, before this slide is on the practical aspects. So before we jump to that, do keep in mind that you have a case presented with the idea that how you would face it in real life. So this set of information that I've provided is not comprehensive. Part of your role is to kind of find out what are the missing pieces of information. What more information do you need to elicit? So this benefits both people working as data stewards. So when a researcher approaches you, you think about the types of questions you need to ask to get a fuller picture of what's happening, but also for researchers. When you have a problem set up, think through all the possible consequences of things you want to do, and that could impact how you work. Okay. Beyond that, the idea here is that, well, Claudia was very clever. She gave me the QR code. So every people online, but also people here, if you can scan the QR code, you will land on a Google Doc, which, let me see if I can. Oh yeah, let me. So this is where what you would have online, right? So what I've described so far, all of that is here, right? So what I essentially want you to do is to first think about what is the missing information, and then think about partners, all the different risks, possibilities that I mentioned, right? Think about what those possible risks are, and then we will go through mitigations. What I think would be ideal is that we'll spend, say, the first 5 to 10 minutes with a discussion on what do you think of the missing information, or what you want to know. Afterwards, there are 7 aspects of risk. So we'll spend 5 minutes each for you to list the possible risks you think belong in each of those categories. Is that clear to everybody? I'm seeing. Okay, so sure. First 5 to 10 minutes, I would like to have essentially an interaction between you and me, also people in online, including about what more information you would like about the case. So essentially identifying the details you would like. Right. After that, we will essentially go into the risk analysis part of it. So there are 7 risks. We'll spend 5 minutes each, so that you can essentially identify the possible risks for the case you're working on, for those 7 ones there, and then mitigations. I already have a list I've populated with what I think are, rather what we thought, all of us working together, the possible risks and mitigations are, and we will discuss that at the end. And we have surprises at the end also. Okay, so now we will jump into the part of the session where I imagine people need to still look at the QR code and website. Yeah, sorry about that. So this group, if you can come to work together, yeah, that'll be great. Yeah. They don't copy anything. Everything is available on the Google Doc. Yeah. Yeah, essentially, you've on the Google Doc, you have the case again presented, right? What I would like is for you to look through, and if you feel like you'd like more information on the case, what is the missing information? First, identify that. What are the possible things you would like to know more of? Sorry. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in this case, the focus group is going to be formed by groups of participants that the researchers recruit. Who's doing the project? Okay. Good question. The project is done by researchers at a faculty at a Dutch university. Yeah. Oh, hold on, please, Mike, so the people online can hear. Also, if the previous question, if you could just ask again, just. The answer was a faculty at a Dutch university. Okay, yeah. Your question? The rules are the laws and laws that apply. So now you're essentially getting into the risk analysis part of it. So what the questions you're bringing up now will be part of the risk analysis, and the idea would be to mitigate them going forward. So you know, you're going through the process. Yes. 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 In this case, yes. Was that not mentioned? Good question. That is also a particular aspect that you want to address in the risks and mitigation. So the reason for it being kind of hollow is that you want to think through all of these things, and both as a researcher and research support, data steward, whatever role you play. So lots of time researchers will not who have thought of all those steps. So that's kind of what we're doing. Yeah. One more. The scale of the project, essentially of the order of tens to a couple of hundred. This would not be a very large scale one now. Also, just so that on the previous question, you asked the scale of the project in terms of what? So that is the one I answered. There's another scale involved, right? The funding is a national funding body. So the data objects question is a good one, and that will be again something that you want to address in the risk. So this would help you kind of think through what categories they belong to and what sort of mitigations you can apply. So this one is being done in English. But by the way, so this is in a sense a real case. I've kind of embellished a lot of the data so that there is no one researcher upset with me or the group for us sharing it. But of course, they also know that we're doing things like this. Are there any questions online about? Okay. Do keep in mind that if you don't explore the additional information you need, then when you come up to risks and mitigations, you'll suddenly find yourself having either too many risks or unable to define them. So that's one way for you to identify, yeah, no, I need more information on the overall picture. Yeah, as many questions as possible, yes. So part of the details on participant selection, that will be in the risk assessment. So you're going to be doing that part of it. I guess there was something online. From Sulim K, which tools will be used for voice recording transcripts and VR models? Excellent question. So this will also be so information provided in the text provides some context about what VR tools are used, but doesn't specify the specific tools, and that is part of your assessment. We find these things from personal. I find this is quite useful in terms of, for example, understanding what resources you would need at your university. Right? Is it a good idea to invest on getting a secure surveying platform? Is it a good idea to have dedicated resources on interviewing or space to do that and things like that? Okay, I think that's enough time on the exploring and fleshing out the case. So now let's dive into the section about the actual risk analysis. Oh, The tools approved for use by the university. The tools upload data to a commercial. So these are excellent points, all belonging in the risk analysis and subsequently in the mitigation. So Sulim, excellent questions. Yes, those are definitely questions you want to ask. But yeah, please add them as we go through the risk analysis now. Okay, just give me a second so that I can locate myself. All right, so let's take about, say, 5 minutes on the partners and collaboration. So I'm going to move the slide. So that's the 7 risks. Take a look at the Google Doc that has a space for all the 7 risks for you to essentially fill in. For online people individually, so just go ahead and fill in. If you'd like to have specific things, you can maybe add your tag after that or something, or just fill in for each section. We will go through each of the sections and then we'll move on. Yeah, and for the groups here, please discuss among yourselves and think about what partner and collaboration, location, or other risks are presented. So we'll start with the first one, partners and collaboration. So for the people who are in here, once you kind of agreed on what risks you think, one of you can just add it to the online doc. So I think that in that way everybody will have a common place to look at things.